Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is still Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. Today, coming up first, is a track that I'll tell you about a second before it. Yes, I will be breaking space and time to be doing a whole bunch of things at once that I should have done in the correct order, which was, if you'd like to have one of your tracks present in one of these videos, what you should do is head on over to the Discord channel in the video description, which it's a Discord server that has a channel that is labeled for the submissions for this, has rules, and also the moderators that are very helpful will be there to help you to make sure your things are named properly and also the right format and whatnot. So then when I come here for today to be the day, usually Wednesday, I will come randomly select 7 of them to be the one that was played. Like this first one, which is Metal D&B Experiment 1 by Ghost Asset. I wonder how this is going to sound. Alright, here we go.
1, 2, 3, drop!
Okay, so that was a pretty valiant effort. I say valiant. That sounded kind of, was that hardcore, like the plugin hardcore. I spent a lot of time in my youth attempting to make fake metal using emulated distortion plugins and that kind of thing. They're a lot better now. Even hardcore itself is actually a lot better than the thing I tried doing, like just straight only Slayer. And did you know that Slayer's distortion thing had a separate thing called Slayer FX that you could use to do the Slayer effect on other things? That was epic. But that just brought back a lot of memories. So sound design notwithstanding, the primary sort of problem with this track is its power of balance. You got the metal sort of balance right. Like this definitely has that texture, especially in the sense that there is basically no sub presence. There's a lot of mid-range presence. It's definitely a lot of power there, but the low end was fairly underrepresented throughout most of this. And that's difficult because that's the drum and bass angle of it. Like any kind of electronic music at all angle of it is that you have powerful, solid low end and everything else. And that's really hard to do against a genre whose primary description is honestly how distorted and muddy it is, like metal. So coming to it is mostly exercise of extremely targeted kind of layering of sidechaining and stuff like that, and against realistic things and synthetic things. And it's just kind of a taste on like how far to go on what kind of thing. Another thing though, is how squished everything is overall is I think to do with how individual the elements are. Like there's pretty much one thing doing one thing, and then there's like one air layer on whatever one thing that's doing the whatever one thing. And this is important because what we normally think of as a good version of this, like, because we like how loud this is a good loudness, but it has that kind of sacrifice on transient that comes from getting there by a certain way, a certain amount of kind of distortion through compression and actual distortion, that kind of thing. But a consequence of this is that we get a very good look at all the stuff. Well, and what we're looking at here is a little bit like a low resolution texture in a video game, but in a very high resolution monitor. Like, it starts to be like, yeah, okay, it's crisp and clean, and I can see everything. It's just that there's not much to look at. And because of this extra high resolution, now there's this sort of like, there's almost negative space because there's not enough detail on the detail. And that's kind of where this comes in. Like, let's grab a section and listen to it. So let's listen to this again. Hey, debut. So on that lead, right, the do, it's its thing, and it could be whatever it is that's making it. It sounds pretty well like an individual element. It could be a layered stuff that came together to sound that way. That's a different discussion. But on top of it is a kind of reverbed element, but it really feels like just the one. So this is a pretty low poly experience, and the way that you would sort of spice this is that like and like sort of like a video game texture on an object, you have to add smaller detail, not necessarily more detail. So it's not like, okay, there's this much presence messing, I'm just gonna double it up, have another lead, like doing the same. That'd be way too much, in my opinion. Could be pretty rad, but point is this sort of solution is that you don't look at the big element. You look at like, okay, well, I have reverb. What if I put a delay before the reverb so that there's this extra kind of back and forth before the reverb gets processed? What if I put an extra layer of phaser that's aside the like, and each thing you add is pretty well less than the previous thing, and the sort of the job and the design of it, like the art and the engineering, is to get it all kind of apparent and legible against other things, so that when you're looking at it, you can tell that you're looking at a texture of an object and not like a cloudy mishmash of nonsense in front of you, because you don't have the resolution to back up that amount of data. Like, imagine looking at something as killer as Horizon Zero Dawn at like 240p or 140p, whatever, 8p. Like, doesn't if you reduce that much pixel action, it doesn't matter that you have that much detail. It just straight up can't be seen. And a lot of older formats are like that, and we live like that, and we got away with doing a lot of basically cartoons in the musical sense, in terms of like leaving with certain amounts of just incredible individual loudness, but not having a lot of extra detail, and filling up all the space and being as loud and bright as possible. And now in modern ways, like we have an ability to have high resolution knowledge and vision of what's happening, so we got to fill it up with stuff, and we can't just poof up individual items. As much as I wish I could and have tried, like, this is me basically saying that as a result of my research, I can conclude that you gotta put detail on the detail if you want more detail. Anyway, good job overall. The groove is there. You nailed the metal aspect. You really should pop up on your power and the sort of modern digital aspect, I guess, if you care that much more about it being that much more merged. Like, I'm coming at this from an angle of someone who expects it to compete in the electronic sphere, but perhaps you're getting this to compete in the metal sphere, and this might actually work that way. Who knows? You know, is the answer to that question. Let me get my downloads folder back opened up. You like how it freaked out early? Oh, wait, you weren't there for that. This is a new recording. Cool, never mind. Coming up next, we have Posterior Superior with OIP. The name of the artist is Posterior Superior, and the track name is OYP. There's a bunch of other names I don't know if I'm doing right, and this is one of them. Let's see what this is like. Note the time and the space. Start at the beginning. That was certainly an experience. Was this a collab? Was this a collab with yourself? Like, because here's my thought process here, like hearing this, right? Okay, all right, sure, weird, but sure, okay, a split, and that's neat, and then this again, but different, and it's sort of a difference. And there's two ways I could think of this. One, this is a new producer who, over the course of a month, just slammed a bunch of stuff together as they were figuring out the stuff they could do, and it's neat. Or two, this is a bunch of new producers who were doing all of that, but did it all really fast. And then not necessarily in a month. And it's sort of the joke here is that when you're new, you do just kind of go all over the place, and a lot of things interest you, and you don't really have a set anything, so nothing is anything. Like, the choices. What were the choices? What was the goal? And this is, all right. The last time I heard myself do something like this, I had a number of assumptions about the world. And I guess I can give myself and yourself some advice if there's something. Wow. Because, like, at this point, I wasn't even sure if I was trying to be professional or not. This was mostly just getting a grip on the tools level stuff. You seem to have a better grasp of actually, like, compressing and distorting things than I did at the time, which might seem like a hilarious thing to say and having just heard this. But let's consider a number of things. At the time we're discussing is like 2005. This is before dubstep. This is around when drum and bass was still like the main kind of loud, cool king thing, and it like I didn't get loudness. I didn't know how to do that. So like what I would do is I would have just turned the master down and down and down and down so that it wouldn't clip, and then eventually I would just let it clip, and that'd be how I wrote stuff. It'd be so long before I finally figured out that like limiting was how that life was supposed to be. But all of the way until that, this is kind of how stuff sounded. Very distorted and very busted, and every once in a while, very quiet. But also, I would just fully expect individual songs to have this kind of vast difference within themselves. This was a product of two things. One, a primary lack of just fundamental arrangement knowledge, but mostly because, two, my primary consumption of the material that was inspiring me was almost entirely on radio DJs. Like, I didn't really go to shows, but I did listen to a lot of mixes. And that colored some expectation because as I didn't really follow artists or individual songs, much like sort of not knowing what was or wasn't added in a remix of something, I have just no idea of when songs begin or end. Like, especially if a DJ mixes them well enough. Like, especially a genre like drum and bass is repetitive enough, it can sound kind of similar from song to song, you know what I mean? So, as a result, though, I got kind of used to the idea that, like, at any second, the song could just shift into something utterly unrelated, because these DJs would do that too, and also the genres would do that too. Like, I had no way to know that wasn't just in a song. So I would do that. I would write in songs just big shifts. I'd be like, cool, this is the point in the song where I utterly change everything, where I have an entirely new mastering chain just on a new mixer insert. Like, that level of weirdness. And this is sort of what that reminds me of in here. And I didn't quite get that, like, no, this whole thing, this was an entire song. This was just one snippet of a thing that got filtered in between some stuff, and that's why it sounded cool. But no, they had to get that snippet from a bigger thing. And in order to actually make this the way that it came together, the way that I feel it coming like this, meant making three different universes for them to be collided within in another medium entirely. And I a little like don't even recommend giving a damn about that. Like I gave a damn about that because I ultimately wanted to make like songs and albums and stuff, and I cared enough to know about like arrangement in such a way that I wasn't just kind of haphazardly do that. On the other hand, I still just kind of primarily consume music via mixes and stuff, which means if you have songs that are just within themselves mixes, they're great. They're fine. It's awesome. Like, I don't care. It's an experience, and I dig it. And as far as that, like, that is the least problematic part of this experience as a whole, is how unrelated all the bits are. And that seems kind of strange, because almost a big joke about a lot of electronic music is this sort of disparate song narrative of like, it's not a real piece of music because the drop in the intros don't sound like they're related. Like, and the long-term kind of sign of doing it right was that they were related, that you managed to like make a thematic relationship. And you know, I agree with that. Like, that's cool. Like, if this was more related, it would be cool. And who doesn't see ways to make that happen? Like, this is a neat little expression of some chords, smattering them in there against some stuff, and now it feels like a bigger, sort of more intentionally homogenous experience. Of course, faking that, obviously, but the point is, you kind of just do what you want. There's avenues and purposes for any version of this, arrangement-wise. Mix-wise, wow. This is where we start asking like follow-up questions and like coming back a week later to check up on the prescription on stuff, because what was the goal? Like, part of the mix thing is that they do kind of have a similar enough like related power to each other from moment to moment. So this kind of very big shift in tone is a bit of a weird. And a huge part of this is I just don't know what the goal was. I just don't. Like, there's kind of a glitch mobby vibe in here, and I get that the glitch mob. I bring that up a lot as an example of a tone that sounds like it's broken and gross. It's not actually broken and gross. It's a magic trick to have broken and gross vibes, but to still retain real power, which is why they're good. It's why we care about them. And why they're not the one example. Plenty of people do that a lot. It's basically a whole genre. It's still, but it isn't really just letting it go like that. There's still stuff involved. Anyway, enough talking about just a ton of speculation, because it's hard to judge with disparate tastes what anyone was trying to do or where they were trying to go, especially because the name is Oip, and I guess the group name is Posterior Superior. Like, neat. Okay, and here's another name I'm pretty sure I just don't get. The name is I'm a Cat, Slyferd, and Hauky, and I'm pretty sure this is I'm a Cat and Slyferd and Hauky as three different people collaborating on a song called Sound Weapon. That's my best guess at what that file name meant. Feel free, if you're this person or they people, to correct me on that. In the meantime, let's see what this sounds like once I get in the position to note the time. That was cool. So here's another cool example of like, so this I'm not hoping this is a collab because this would make sense in terms of like a split bit of stuff, right? This is a lot more thematically related though. Um, this definitely feels like an amount of attention was paid to sections. So that's kind of the thing that I was missing when I was at that stage of like an arrangement lack. That like there's also a sort of drive to avoid repetition, and when you're new, you take that like a little literally sometimes, and you do that to like such a degree. I don't know. I was a bit used to like to movie scores and stuff like John Williams nonsense, where like moment to moment everything changes, every single thing, like how fast that stuff is, like what's being played, what key it's in, how like everything. So like that's the sort of experience I kind of draw from when I think of, okay, I want to not make things repetitive. Like that's how far and how fast I move, like a per beat kind of thing. And when you do that though, you lose cohesion and you lose listeners fast, especially when you don't have visual content to keep up with it. But with something like this, it's very clear that like, okay, there's like there's sections that last a length of time and then they express and move within them, and that's what makes a thing like this enjoyable, like in a really literal real way, the word enjoy. Like a person feels this in a very visceral way due to the blocked kind of sequential ordered nature, and that's the engineering, and the art is doing the stuff within it that is in the way that's, you know, cool. But that's just a taste deal. You have to serve it on a platter that is understood, and that's the sections. You can still you can frame it and be different and still juke around the time or whatever. Plenty of people will go, this is also a very like rigid type of thing to do. But even the crazy John Williams stuff can on a large overview of it be broken down into sections, and it makes writing things to that degree, and it also makes keeping things thematic 1,000% easier. Something else that like I really learned hard when I was referencing the tracks that I was inspired by, being like, why does my track stack up to this? The big reason was, okay, it almost feels like they're psychic. And I mean, how do you think this? They wrote the song. They know what's happening later in the song. But when you're a listener, you feel like, oh my God, how did they do that? How did they come in and make it all this? Like they come in with relevant content. They began with a thing and it exposited into something that was a relevant theme later. How did they do that? It seems like magic, but like, they made the song. The song exists out, like, you know, as sure as we can see it right now, of that's how they did it. They're in a DAW and they moved it and they made choices to be like this. That's over here now. That's really as far as that goes. But when you're a listener, you don't know any of that, and you think producers are like Dr. Manhattan and can see the future while living in the present at the same time, and that creating that feeling feels like an impossible sort of choice. Like, how do you choose to do that to people? And you do it by like the very literal description of it. Like, you just kind of foreshadow it, and you do it by like going, what's going on? Put it over there in the same key, in the same timing, some amount of filters and less stuff. It gets such a like almost insultingly simple, and it's a little bit to think it isn't this is a little bit a fantasy that a lot of newer producers have, that no, there has to be like a mystical kind of power to be able to have done the thing that made me feel the way it did. That like it can't just be some blocks and sections that really spoke to me this way. Where's the artsy, jazzy, broken nonsense that like is supposedly the key to the cosmic understanding? Why isn't that stuff like come on? We do, that's called music for musicians, and we all have that phase eventually where we realize, okay, yeah, there's only a certain type of listener that's able to even begin to get into that sort of thing, and it's a-okay to appeal to other people every once in a while. I'm not talking about this at all at that point. Like, this track had nothing to do with that. This was a fairly well laid out sort of integral experience, and that I totally would feel good being longer. But stuff that has a lot of like phases and motion to it, especially progressively like this, will have that vibe. It's hard to end it because, unlike a sort of repeated sectional experience, you don't really know when the end's coming. And in a repeated experience, you know. Like, I remember being angry about this, listening to like a Marilyn Manson song, like a pretty regularly, comparatively poppy thing, like compared to some of the stuff I listen to now. But the thought, I remember being like, you know, halfway through it and knowing I was halfway through it based on, okay, they've done this many times, and so it's going to do this and they're going to repeat it again. Like, it didn't matter that I thought the song was cool, just that, like, by the time I got halfway through it, I feel like I'd already heard the second half. And I did. But that's because that's kind of music is designed to be that way. And it's also a little bit of why music like this is mixed to be one after the other, like, very quickly in mixes. Engaged listeners are hard to please. Anywho, moving on, we have River, I believe, by Ebenator, I also believe. It could just be Ebenator River. I don't know. It's getting harder and harder to figure names out. Moving on, though. Let's see what it's like. That is a long, high frequency tail. It is still going. I can't even hear that. Hmm. This is a high sub. What's interesting is that there is actually there's the right there's it's still playing. There is an actual low sub in here. Like it's there, but it isn't as loud as this. That's a problem. So this sweep is kind of funny because this was hilariously dry when it came up here. Like it sounded needed it needed some kind of, I don't know, reverb or whatever, just up here at least in my mind. And then it stopped here, and like this was clearly like the low end in your mind, and it needed to be down here. It needed to keep going, and that down there needed to be this loud. And the idea that this felt comfortable to you tells me that your listening setup is interesting. Or headphones or speakers or whatever's going on, you're being reported power in a way that makes you feel like this is doing it for you. And it might be like it might sound just fine, but it probably means that tracks that are inspiring you that you know sound right don't sound fine. They probably sound a weird kind of weak in comparison, and it's because all their power is in the right sub, which isn't being represented correctly in your listening setup, which is making you feel like you don't have enough power. And this is, I'm making a lot of assumptions right now about your choices here, and like actually that last track had a bit of this too. A choice of your sub having an interestingly high presence and power. It's not like you can't do that. Like a lot of really cool, even loud, heavy feel like Joe Ford stuff. A lot of the coolest stuff tends to be very high key, and it's fine. It's just not that high, and not with that much power. Like the benefit of doing that is you can go faster. You can do like liquid drum and bass stuff, and not and not have how fast your bass is interfere with your rhythm, which becomes a real problem when in drum and bass land, where at 174 the key of F is an actual rhythmic oscillation. The sub bass key of F oscillates at a 32nd note, I'm pretty sure, or a 16th note or something like that. But at 174 BPM, and so how cool is that? A and B, if you're kind of off a bit and you're that slow or that low on your sub or even lower, then it can start to whip around and start to hit things and start it just to make things sound muddy just for being a note, and interfere with like a rhythm, make your drum beat sound off, and that could be an issue. Then a high speed sub solves that, but you also sacrifice power and grit, which usually isn't an issue when you're doing liquid stuff. So who cares? Still though, root note sub needs to be like kind of the loudest, most powerful element in the track, and you'll find that that's actually the case for things that don't aim that way. Damn, don't aim that way. Those were words. Actually, those weren't words, but when I tried to say them, they were. If you take a look at like I don't know what kind of reference, and this is a problem with referencing in general. This was a problem I had with referencing, which was that I took it as a challenge, not necessarily as a target. And you view it originally like I keep assuming things, but this is still just projections of mostly my memories of becoming this person as a producer. I would listen to a reference and be like, okay, this is this track and it has like this much sub to it, and it has this much presence on the high end or whatever, and I would get my track to be there, or I wouldn't. And in the beginning, it was because I could not. Like, no matter how much I tried, I wouldn't be able to approach how loud the correct feeling was. And so it didn't matter that I wasn't going to overshoot it. Like, this is essentially the lesson there. But eventually I got good enough at the things that make things the kind of loud that is, and eventually realized that there was, in fact, a too loud. There's a too loud for everything. It's just a matter of timing and pushing. And you learn enough about it, and eventually you realize that if you feel like it, you can just make everything a wall of whatever, and it doesn't actually sound that great. And you got to start making choices about like just how fast you're going to make stuff. And a lot of those choices are based on, okay, what's going to sound the best on the most things. And that's when you start talking about mastering and listening on like different playbacks in the car and speakers and deliberately crappy speakers, jokes of speakers, mono, that kind of stuff. That's when you start doing all this experimentation to figure out exactly how certain things perform in certain places, so that you're not making a super lovely presentation of a thing that only sounds good in your setup and nothing else. And what I find is that unless you spend just an unbelievable amount of money, your setup is not going to give you this information. It just is not. There's going to be something wrong with it. There's going to be some imbalance. There's going to be something of an issue preventing you from getting just over the air and over in your just hearing it a good idea of what's happening. So, though, there are people who did do the work of getting the millions of dollar studio and the tens of thousands of dollar an hour engineers' job sitting around making all these choices for us and doing all the due diligence. And these are the people who are like, release on the big labels, Pendulum and like Feed Me and Deadmau5 and all these people. Like, they themselves either have the setups or they have sent their things to be worked on at these places that have these setups. And what I'm saying to you is, however it is that this output sounds on your system is a target and not a challenge. Like, it's not as though they could not have made it louder. They chose not to. This was the results of all of their research that this right here was the best choice. Who's to say if it was or not? This is, of course, assuming that you're just not able to get what you want out of just like your own setup here. But if you find that your comparisons are too widely away from things that were direct inspirations of what you're trying to do, then there might be a reason, and it might not be because what you're doing is that much better. Like that's a thing. Like, I eventually did have the experience where like I made things that felt a kind of cool way to me, only to hear them in a different environment and go, oh God, all I hear is drums. Someone help me. And figuring out that like when I actually go listen to a real thing and really reference it, I realized that like it's actually kind of an illusion what it does and doesn't have all that much power. Like, you would think the things that slap and hit the most presently are the things that actually are the things that have the most power, and it's actually not the case. It's just a lot of chokes and tricks that are making that be that kind of presence. But in the meantime, the actual power are things like the sub and the kick and the kick sub, and like the vocal is also super loud, but like not much louder than, like not louder than the sub or the kick. All these interesting little things that you don't really notice if you're not doing a really deliberate job trying to. Because they're all these things that are designed to like kind of spread a song out across a lot of variables. One of these variables is playing it out on a large system, which is probably the most important one, because this is the system, this is the environment where like the mistakes tend to like cost. Like listening to it on the home systems and radios and whatever, like, wow, like, it's fine. Enough things have enough difference that like however quote unquote bad you think you are is within that margin of difference from whatever you think is good. So like listener wise, like no one's going to care. I never cared, at least when I was listening to just tracks at large. Like, one of the reasons why it took me so long to figure out that I needed to separate my subs was because I did not go to a show to experience what truly solid sub did to people and things at a show that big. Like, without that experience and just living on the experience of just listening to stuff in my own ass time and with decent headphones, decent speakers, just in a room, like, whatever, like the experience of having a separate sub wasn't so transformative that like, oh God, I need to do those other things, until I heard it in some place with enough power to actually represent it. Then it was, oh God, this is why these things are so popular. Like, because that's the demographic, the people who go to these things. It's a bit difficult to describe that and discuss that now, but that is essentially like the core of the business at the time. And that comparison led me to make the choice that like most of the time I'm just going to make a choice that makes it like at best case work best in that environment, and then just kind of like second best it all the way down. And outside of the big show requirement, there's kind of not a lot, which is why I've been waffling about all these speculations and projecting on stuff like this, because ultimately at the end of the day, the guy could just show up and be like, no, all of this was choice, and I'm making a statement about mid-range power, and I would just be like, sure, it's good. Like, excuses work, like it's hard to look at stuff and be like, no, you did it wrong, because wrong just gets harder and harder every day. Coming up next, we have Into the Dark by Octium. I need to get bigger font in my Windows folders. Wow, I like how this looks spectrally. Let's see how it performs sonically with the time that I note maps. Bam. way to bookend it. I dug that. But these two sections actually represent kind of the biggest problem in this track, which is how deeply there's a giant hole in this section of the frequencies here, which is what we're looking at. Yeah. Okay, so pretty much the 2K, 5K, like 1K, 5K area. Like everything else below this and above this is wonderful, but just how big a cut there is in here is somewhat of an issue. If there was a vocal in here, this would be perfect. This like and like I even just kind of forgot about it after a while. Like as far when I got over here until this happened, and I got reminded, oh yeah, that was actually kind of like the promise of those frequencies once, and then they just kind of went away. And every time he reminded you of them and then they're not there in the drop, it becomes it makes the drop feel more split. It's self-split. Like you lose the power of this kick when you kind of incomplete the hit here. And that's a this frequency spectrum area issue in terms of how it all hits. But in terms of how it all hits though, it still works really well. Like this rolls and feels away. Like this switch up like licky sounding like bass. We all know how much I feel about that, but it's like just on the edge of it. It's cool. It's good. It works out, and like the tonality of it all is nice, but it a little bit has the problem that the first track had with the issue where there's pretty much the one thing going on, and then the one air layer for it, and there's not actually a whole lot of detail on the detail. And given the fact that there's just this huge deficit in the frequency relation going on in here, I kind of think that like a song could use just more layers of junk response to it happening there. That's where I would go with this, but again, you just show up and be like, this is an experience, and feeling the emptiness inside when promised great bounty in the beginning. That wasn't me trying to do an accent. I actually just straight up listed that. But that was, if that could be the thing, then you did. Like, fine. See how easy it is to come up with that kind of stuff for this? Like, I'm starting to think that is ending up being, like, most of all the coolest mystical stuff that anyone anywhere ever thought, like, was someone pulling some great musical triumph, was kind of them doing something where they tried to do something, but came out a whole other way. But they just act like it kind of was what they wanted enough. You can't really call them on it, you know? Like, even if you do know enough to, like, even to have a discussion, like, you still just can't call them on it. And that's been history. I was going to make a joke on the previous track about how it had a progression quite similar to Pharrell's, is it called Get Lucky? Is that what that song's called? But I was making a joke about, like, oh, you can get sued, except that, like, the big joke being that, like, that's such a regularly accessible and normal progression that, like, the joke is that he himself ripped it. And so has everyone who's used it in the last 50 years. It's, like, and not from, like, a source. Like, it's a very widely recognized, popular, easily done progression. That's why we don't copyright this stuff. Like, you cannot copyright a progression. You can copyright a melody with lyrics and words. Can't copyright a beat. Can't copyright a progression. Because in the Western experience of there being 12 notes, there's just only so much you can do. And that means that, like, when you tell anyone you did anything for any reason, and, like, there's just no way to say. Because, like, why has any of this been? This has been me being overly philosophical. Yeah, that. Coming up next, we have Waning by Nightlite. Yes. This looks fun. Yeah. All right. And away we go with this. And then it ended. Okay. Well, that was a great start. If this was like a beat sample for someone to like put a Vox on or something, that would be, this is good. Okay, so the only experience I have to even begin to act like I have that kind of authority to say that is when none whatsoever. When I very first began to produce, in 2004, like I got a hold of the DAW in 2003, but then I got the thing and I was starting to think to myself, wow, I can do some stuff. And the reason I thought this is because I was at the performing arts school, and there were a bunch of other people around me like interested in the game, in particular rappers and stuff. So they're always hungry for beats, and most of them now probably make their own. But back then it was very much like if you had beats, they just fall over you, and because everyone wants demos, this was the thing to do. Like it wasn't. Now you're making the thing to make the thing that you're going to put out and have them do. But back then you couldn't do that. Like that wasn't the thing that was possible in the way that we understand it. So what the game was to make demos that would then gain popularity that you could then send to a label to take you and develop you into something real. Like this was the extreme end of that life being possible in terms of time frame. Like this was still kind of the 90s in 2003 and 4. So here I am on SoundClick. This is a website that lets you upload music and stuff, which was rare back in the day. I was a member of this other site called Hiiii, and the whole only reason it was a competitor to DeviantArt that died. DeviantArt is still around. The Hiiii, the only reason I was on it is because it lets you put up music for free, like any amount of it. There were no restrictions, and it became a problem for them. But they're dead. That's fine. But SoundClick was also another one, but they had some restrictions, just amounts and size and that kind of thing. But you could also sell your beats and lease your beats. And this was just a magical proposition, this idea that it was possible to actually get some money from producing beats. But obviously this was a thriving thing to have been doing for decades at this point. I just knew this to me, high schooler. And I attempted to integrate into this and to actually use and do and make beats and that kind of thing. And I just cannot do it. I was just not. And I wasn't all that great because I was brand new, but also B, just couldn't navigate the community. I didn't really get what people were after or wanted or whatnot. But having the hindsight that I do now to know that that's what was happening, I can say that like this kind of thing would have flown wonderfully. Like adjusting for changing times and taste, like they'd just be like, yeah, cool, I'll totally like. the thing to do was to lease beats. See, that sounds like a different thing from like you just get a beat and you make a song and that's yours. Like what the hell is leasing? Because you remember this was demo time, right? So the idea was you were essentially making disposable songs. You were giving them beats for them to technically have the rights to show off to someone and say that it was theirs, and like use a reference essentially to be like, yes, we have an agreement that this person's allowed to use this for this purpose. And then like in a month, literally, like either like some amount of like variable, you get your rights back, or you just never lost them, and then someone else can lease it. Like that was what you did. That's probably still what you do, but like in a world that I don't see or have access to, and it feels amazing to say out loud now that that's how to describe that that's how what reality was. But it was coming up on 20 years ago, so that feels right. That feels about right. Because man, 20 years before that time was the early 80s, and could you even describe 2003 to someone in the 80s? Anyway, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of this. The only thing I would say about it is that there's a lack of variety, but given how short it is, you seem to know that it's sparse. I have to imagine it's because you're planning on rolling with it with more nonsense stuff with it. I keep saying nonsense, and I really don't mean anything by the word, but sometimes I do. So I gotta stop. I have to stop just saying the same word and say actual adjectives that people know what I mean when I say. All right. Coming up next, we have Zombiedanceprod. That's the name of the artist. With Low Effort. That's the name of the song. Let's see. I like yells per chant for having experiences kind of be your play. Like you can see the sections kind of be the things they are, but the way it all kind of comes out is the sort of getting there kind of vibe. That might just be just track kicking ass, but either way, like I like the way people have done it so far. This track overall pretty decent. It kind of neat, kind of organite vibe going on. If you, I don't remember any of the lines. If you ever rode with Grandpa, where are you at? Kind of the vibe I got from this. I dig the toners, the toneleys. The switch up is a bit odd, and the musical sort of the progression, the note choices. Don't be afraid to sort of agree with yourself about some things, but in some ways it also means agreeing that like you didn't quite do it, even if it kind of works. So here's more projecting. Like a lot of times when I write some things, I just kind of let them go because I get music, but not enough to totally nail a feeling with like a progression on notes, which is usually what I'm trying to do. Like I tend to remember stuff basically as feelings. And when I think of a song, that's what I'm trying to do again. And that's a bit difficult because that if what feels way to me doesn't really feel to anyone else. So the best I can do is just sort of do relations to things I know that I kind of think also feel the way to someone else. And sometimes it's choices that I wouldn't have made. Sometimes it's chords and elements that I'm just kind of like, when I hear it. So when I hear certain ones in my own stuff that I do, I also feel like the same kind of as far from what I think is right. That is also what tends to be what choices tend to be considered good in the popular sphere. Like I'll try and rely on that. I'll try to be like, if I feel the same level of, I might just let it go because now I'm rolling the dice. Now I'm saying, is this actually going to work? This might actually work better than what I was going to do if it felt right to me. I think I might let this go. And you might be tempted to anyway, just because it's probably holding up some stuff you actually want to be working on that you feel more confident about, like your mix or your design and sound and something. Like, again, this is me projecting me. And the results tend to sound like this. This kind of like, yes, it technically moved, it technically went somewhere, but it weirdly feels like it's kind of treading water. And that comes through when you have a kind of, not so much a lackluster progression as it is like a progression like bereft of goals. You didn't really have like a solid understanding of what good was for yourself, even. Not even like, you didn't know how to write good music. I mean, like, you didn't have an answer to the question of was it good or bad. It was just kind of like it exists, and you want to kind of lean in on that because that's a little bit like you're getting close to it being right. But if it isn't if the answer isn't yes, then the answer isn't yes. And yeah, sometimes we gotta like let some standards be less because A, we either might not nail it, or B, we might not have the time to nail it. C, it might not matter if we nail it. All of this stuff, and it's a good enough reason to just bounce on a thing. But like on primary main stuff like this, that's not one of them. You know what I mean? So you got to make some executive decisions. I just would recommend that you maybe tool the progression a bit more on this one, and that progressions in general be the thing that you do a little more on. So actually, I was mentioning before about the like concept of detail on detail. That works musically too, and zoomed out this far, you can kind of actually see what I'm talking about. Like why I even just brought that up. You could plainly see what the progression is doing, and it's cool. Like it doesn't need to be. I'm not saying it needs to be some cacophonous monster of nonsense, but in the parts of it that are more engaging, you can see a repetition, but you can also it's like just a slightly more engaging element versus just like wall of thing, things that are walls and walls that are things. And versus you could kind of separate timing on some things and also separate like note motions on others. You can kind of see it's sort of going on. But like if you kind of just Gregorian it up where you just kind of do relative and normal notes the whole time, it doesn't move around, but that's also sort of its point is that it doesn't move around. I don't know. Again, you might have had utter total perfect plans for exactly this, and this might have nailed it in every way you wanted to. Isn't it interesting that it's difficult to know if we don't have that conversation? He might have just been like, Seamless, why did you just say that? That's just the dumbest the most non-statement. Like, music is supposed to be like, whenever do you do, when do you have, you don't have this conversation with listeners. Like, sure, you might put a bio, you might put a description in the song title, you might make it like a thing that's like as well known as you could possibly make it, but that has no power over whether whether or not the listener has that information when they hear the song. Like, in that case, what are they going to think of it, and what does it matter what you meant it to think versus what they're going to think? That's the question, right? And this is why I like coming in as blind on these things, because I get to basically be that guy now. I get to be like, all right, not knowing what this was for, what did I think I got? And of course, I'm also being that guy listening directly to it and analyzing it to a T, which is a bit also unreasonable, because what guy is doing that? Like, I would probably have gotten this like in a mix someone else did, and I might not have even noticed it. Like, that's kind of how I listen to music now. I listen to a lot of noisier radio, and I got some cool names in my head, but I couldn't recall a single track to you. How do you fix that? I don't know how to deal with that. Like, I could do this, but like, it feels weird doing it to not viewer tracks. You know what I mean? Also, it's a lot harder with copyright. Anyway, if y'all have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all of that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.